tariffs on a new set of imported goods on Thursday. What's behind this most recent reduction, and can the cut promote more international trade? And despite their geographical distance, China and Portugal are cementing their already excellent ties. What new economic and cultural exchanges are in the pipeline? I sat down with Portugal's foreign minister to find out. Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. China cut import tariffs on over 1,500 taxable goods, including textiles, ceramics, glass, machinery, steel and metal products on November the 1st. The general tariff level on these goods, which represent 1/5 of China's total tariff items, will drop from 10.5% to 7.8%. The move is meant to lower costs for consumers and companies, and also to demonstrate China's efforts to keep opening up its markets. The cut marks the 4th time China has lowered tariffs on imported goods just this year, trimming the country's overall tariff rate to 7.5%, down from 9.8% in 2017. China's trade-weighted average tariff rate will stand at 3.7, slightly lower than that of Australia, which stands at 4.0. So what does this latest tariff cut mean for China's domestic consumers and industries and for foreign exporters? And how do these tariff cuts fit into the U.S.-China trade tensions? Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio are Zhang Jinping, Director of the Center for Regional Economic Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Timothy Stratford, Managing Partner of Covington and Berlin LLP Beijing. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, Mr. Zhang, announced on September the 26th, this latest cut is quite significant, and the State Council statement said that the cuts aim to serve industrial upgrading, lower corporate cost, and meet domestic demand. What are the intentions of the Chinese government in announcing this latest round of tariff cuts? Are they trying to boost the domestic economy, or are they sending a message that China is further opening up its markets?
Actually, in my mind, 10 years ago, since China's 12th five-year plan, the central government already announced that we need to promote more balanced international trade policy. That means we should appreciate both export and import instead of only appreciating export. So also from Chinese side, we studied how to encourage China's import for a long time. So in recent years, China's industrial structure is upgraded. Meanwhile, China is the second biggest economy and belonging to middle-income country. So our middle class, their demand for import goods is booming and booming. Especially if you look at China's consumers' behavior in other countries, it's very obvious we need to, increase import instead of make those, travelers to buy in other countries. Of course, for China, we hope to stimulate domestic consumption. Meanwhile, we hope to stimulate, supply side, reform.
The thing is, for instance, China's biggest imports by value are machinery and electrical equipment, and the tariff for that is reduced by nearly 1/3 to 8.8% from 12.2%. Also, China will be cutting tariffs on textile products and construction materials. That will drop from 8.4% from 11.5%, and so on and so forth. What's the calculation here? I mean, the Chinese government will be earning less as tariff revenue, but how do they believe that they will be benefiting from such cuts? In what ways?
Firstly, for international trade, tariff mean calculation have different ways. Sometimes people just consider, simple, arithmetic, mean. So that means just consider, a very simple tariff level for different kind of goods. Didn't consider, the true trade volume happened. But for weighted mean value. That means we have to consider for every kind of goods, how many value happened, and then their contribution to the tariff level, and then by those weight mean. That means that's a true mean tariff mean for every country. So in this regard, just before you mentioned China's weighted mean value already below Australia. This type of developed economies shows China's market opening up further.
Okay, Tim, are you along with us in?
Sure.
Yeah. What do you think is the significance of this latest round of reduction? How significant it is in your eyes?
Well, first of all, of course, it's a very positive thing for the Chinese government to do this, and you need to recognize that tariffs can have a very positive effect on the overall competitiveness of an economy, because often the imported goods are not the final products that go to consumers, but they're intermediary products. For example, if you lower a tariff on steel, that means that your car producers can buy less expensive steel, and then their auto industry is more competitive. So reducing tariffs is a great classic way to help make your own economy more competitive.
In the context of this trade friction between China and the United States, how are American companies likely affected by this latest round of good news? Are they going to benefit a lot, or more or less unchanged?
Well, to the extent that American products are subject to higher tariffs because of the retaliatory action that China has taken responding to U.S. tariffs, then the American products will be relatively less competitive than products from other countries. So in some ways, American companies may have to stand a little bit at the sidelines and say that these tariff reductions are going to benefit exporters from other countries, but not exporters from the United States.
Yeah, Jinping, please explain to our American audiences here, are they going to enjoy these reductions the same as other companies, or will they be at a disadvantage because China already had a retaliatory list for many American products?
If without trade friction between two economies, of course, U.S. company also they should enjoy most favorable tariff level provided by Chinese side. They can benefit from this process. The problem is that right now Chinese side already impose from 5% to 25% for different type of products in the U.S.
From the United States.
From the United States, especially recently for $60 billion U.S. goods, from 5% to 25% tariff level additional.
So basically, if President Trump withdraws his tariffs on China, then these retaliatory tariffs will be withdrawn from China's part as well. Tim, how do you look at the situation?
Well, I think that's true. But you have to step back and say, okay, why did President Trump impose these tariffs? And they have to do with a broader set of questions. The U.S. believes that China's economic model is using methods that are different from the U.S. model, and that it creates certain types of inequities. The analogy I use is a football game. We go to a football field, and on one side you have the winner of the Super Bowl, the American-style football. On the other side of the field, you have the winner of the World Cup. So they have very different ideas of how to play, and they both are very good teams, but they follow different rules. So the American players, and in this case, I think the American-style football is more like the Chinese economy. They wear helmets and shoulder pads. The English-style football players don't, and so it's easy to get hurt.
Okay, so the way to resolve that, I think, would be through negotiation instead of just one side punishing the other, or kick the other side out and say, you don't respect the rules, we have to do something about that, right? But this is not what we are seeing, right? I think that is the unfortunate thing, Mr. Zhang.
But my understanding is that actually right now both China and the U.S. We are playing in the field of WTO. In this regard, I think that's fair trade. But of course, I know that from the U.S. side they don't think so. But the problem is that WTO maybe should be reformed, in the view of the U.S. friends. But we have to, promote WTO reform and the negotiation in the future. But before that, we should follow right now existing rules and regulations.
So how are this latest round of reductions impact on U.S.-China trade relations? Will it alleviate the tension? Will it be a good sign from the Chinese government to the U.S. counterparts that we are doing, although maybe not to the level that you expected us to, but we are doing at an increasing pace?
I think that for Chinese side, we have our, reform and opening up steps. That China's very valuable experiences that our reform has to, to go step by step,
according to China's own rhythm.
Yeah.
But Tim, from the U.S. side, do you think these measures will be picked up? Do you think the message will be picked up?
Well, I think obviously it's a positive thing for China to do, but it doesn't really address the U.S. concerns. And so I don't think it's going to have any real measurable impact on resolving the current situation. The problem is that the things that the United States is asking China to do, China doesn't think is in its own best interest to do it, so they don't want to do it. And so there's a real standoff, and I don't think China will be willing to do those things unless some time passes and it turns out that external conditions are such that China feels that it's in their best interest to make those changes. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Okay. What about the CIA, the International Importer Expo? I just want to, maybe 30 minutes, how are American companies feeling about that now that these measures are out, and also there are preferential tax policies for all the companies who are present at the expo?
Well, again, I think the fact that China's focused on increasing their imports is a very positive thing. But for American companies, you can't think that you're going to be a competitive exporter to China if you have tariffs that your competitors from other countries don't have. So I think American companies and Chinese companies doing business with the United States have to step back and hope that the governments will find solutions to the underlying trade disputes.
To avoid long-term uncertainty, probably. Okay, many thanks. We have to leave it there. Zhang Jianping, Director of the Center for Regional Economic Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Timothy Stratford, Managing Partner of Covington and Berlin LLP. We will take a very short break. You're watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. When we come back, I spoke with Portugal's Foreign Minister Augusto Santos Silva about how both China and Portugal can boost connectivity and multilateralism. Stay with us. Since the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1979 and a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2005, China and Portugal have been extending their cooperation into a wider range of areas. The Ministerial Conference of the Forum for Economic and Trade Cooperation has provided even broader possibilities, building a bridge between China and Portuguese-speaking countries. So how can China and Portugal boost connectivity and help safeguard multilateralism under the context of trade frictions around the world? And as Portugal shows strong interest in China's Belt and Road Initiative, how does the country see the future ahead? I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk with the Portuguese Foreign Minister, Augusto Santos Silva. Foreign Minister Silva, thank you very much for accepting our interview.
It's a pleasure.
Well, the two countries established diplomatic relations in 1979, and then they upgraded it to a strategic partnership in 2005. So how would you describe the current relationship, and what has propelled bilateral ties to keep improving and upgrading themselves?
Well, from the political and diplomatic point of view, they are excellent. This is the word. The bilateral relationship between Portugal and China is excellent, absolutely excellent by all standards. From the economic point of view, they are improving, and they are improving a lot, and in the recent years.
For instance, would you like to elaborate a little bit more about the economic relationship?
Of course. Nowadays, China is the 6th supplier of Portugal. China is the 11th client of Portugal. So you see the intensity of the trade relationship. And Portugal is the 4th European country in which the investment of Chinese investors is the greatest. So you can see how things are improving.
Yes, the two countries have seen increasing economic cooperation in the past year. The Chinese customs number put the volume of bilateral trade at $5.6 billion for last year. I don't know what is your number. And by the end of last year, total Chinese investment in Portugal reached over $10.3 billion. So what has trade with China and Chinese investment brought to Portugal?
Well, during our crisis, because we as old European countries, we lived a very important financial and economic crisis between 2010 and 2015, the Chinese investment was crucial. It was a time when we needed foreign capital, foreign investment, trust, credibility, and the Chinese investment brought it all. Capital, investment, initiative, and credibility. So it was very important. But this is not conjuncture. This is a permanent trait nowadays. The Chinese investment is present in some of the most important economic sectors in Portugal, and I mean energy, I mean the banking system, I mean insurance, and I mean also services paid to the people, for instance, healthcare. And this is an investment that is a long-term investment, which is the investment we need. We don't need, you know, that sort of play that is so predominant in the financial international markets. We need real investors that have a long-term perspective. And we think the Chinese case is one of these investments.
Now that the financial crisis or the debt crisis are kind of behind us, how do you foresee future investment from China? Whether it will be continued to be welcome, what kind of role it can play in the future?
Well, we are a very open economy and we are a very open society. So our orientation, our principle is very simple. All the foreign investment is welcome, as long as it complies with the Portuguese rules and of course with the European rules. So if you deal with some sectors or activities or infrastructures that have a key strategic interest, for instance in terms of national security, of course we have more strict rules. But if you are investing in industry, in the food sector, in energy, of course all the investment is welcome, and Portugal has these characteristics. We welcome and we have a lot of foreign investment coming from France and Germany. They are the two most important partners in terms of foreign direct investment, but also coming from the United Kingdom, from Spain, from China nowadays, and from the United States. And
yeah, well, you're talking about these strategic sectors having to do with national security. We know that China's companies, especially some big state-owned companies such as the State Grid of China, have already acquired a considerable stake in very important companies in Portugal, such as the National Energy Company. Some people are saying Portugal is already becoming over-dependent on Chinese investment, and that Chinese influence could be too much and could go from economic sector into political sector. Do you share this kind of concern?
No, I don't share. Well, of course, I think that if you think in terms of, for instance, our defense industry, of course there are rules that are appropriate to that kinds of activity. If you think in terms of what the economists call the natural monopoly, the natural monopoly has to be public. If you think in terms of private companies, the presence of Chinese investment or the presence of German investment or the presence of French investment is welcome. In the state currents of things, One very important Chinese company shares 25% of the total shares of our grid national utility. Another Chinese company shares the same amount, 25% of shares of our main electrical utility. So we can live with that, and we can live with the circumstances in which the weight of the Chinese investment can improve, as we can deal with the Germans, French and other friends that we have.
Are there worries about China's political weight on the domestic decisions of Portugal, however?
We don't feel it. We are a sovereign country, not so old as China, but according to European standards, we are a very old nation, a very old nation state, and we are completely sovereign.
Well, your president has been very firm in his support of the Belt and Road Initiative. Actually, while meeting Wang Yi, he said, with its finest ports in Europe, Portugal is willing to take this advantage and strengthen cooperation with China and further push forward the construction under the Belt and Road Initiative. However, the European Union in general is not on board, is suspicious or hesitating still, again, with cooperating with China on this Belt and Road Initiative. So is there some kind of divergence in views between Portugal and the EU? How are you going to tackle that?
No, I wouldn't say that. We need clarity, and for us things are totally clear. We want to be partners of China in what regards the economic environment and the physical and digital infrastructures needed to improve the relations between Europe and Asia. That's what we want. And we think that Portugal can play a role there, and France and the United Kingdom and so on can also play a role, very important role.
Let's zoom out a little bit and look at Europe and maybe the world in the changes that it's faced with. It's no secret that the United States is putting America first and withdrawing from multilateral institutions and agreements, whereas Europe and China are advocating and safeguarding the multilateral international order that has been in place since the Second World War. So looking at the changing world order, how do you think Europe can find its place in this potentially rivalry that the United States and China find themselves in?
Playing the unique role that belongs to Europe. If you think of the contemporary international agenda, you can see that right now Europe and China share the same engagement to multilateral agenda, the same commitment to the climate changes agenda, the same commitment to the sustainable development goals, and the same apology, the same advocacy of the virtues and benefits of international trade. And this, of course, comes in a way that that shows some proximity between Europe and China.
Mr. Wang Yi, when he visited Europe, he said Europe needs to see China as an opportunity, not as a threat. Do you think there is a certain perception or misperception of China's potential role in Europe at this moment?
You know, my academic background is social sciences, so I always see opportunities and threats, and you have to cope with that, you have to deal with that, and of course you have to transform threats into opportunities, and you have to avoid risks and uncertainties. So we need, of course, cooperation with China. For instance, if you think of Africa, Europe and China should not be competitors. in terms of our cooperation with Africa. We should be partners in our cooperation with Africa. Of course, there are very important divergences between Europe and China. I don't ignore them. But the best way to overcome this divergence is working together in the convergent issues, in the convergent ways.
Next year will be the 40th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Portugal. What kind of activities can we expect?
Well, this will be a year of celebrations, because we shall celebrate two very important events. 40 years of our diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, and also 20 years of the paradigmatic, of the very good, excellent process of transferring the authority of Portugal over Macau to China, the return of Macau to the motherland, as you say, very adequately. So we shall celebrate two things together. And these are a very important events, because you know the process of transferring the authority from Portugal to China in what concerns Macau was very, very good, very cautiously planned, and all the engagements were respected, fully respected. And we shall celebrate it in the grounds, on the grounds that matter the most, that is cultural ties. Because you know, if we know each other, if we know each other's traditions, if we respect each other's literature, if we know each other's arts, we do the most solid grounding of our bilateral relationship. So you shall see Portuguese orchestras, Portuguese ballet, Portuguese arts here in China, and the same will apply to Lisbon, to Portugal.
We're looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Silva.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.